King Makhado, affectionately known as Tshilwavusiku Ramabulana, was a 19th century VhaVenda monarch from the Singo dynasty which ruled over the Zoutpansberg region of South Africa. Makhado is one of the few African monarchs to have never lost a single battle against white invaders. According to Venda historian Professor Mphaya Nemudzivhadi, his first wife Nwaphunga conspired with the Boer supporting faction among VhaVenda and poisoned him in 1895. Makhado's grandfather, King Munzhedzi Mpofu, passed away in 1829. He had 3 sons. Rasithu, who was later known as Ramabulana, Ramavhoya, and Madzhie. Rasithu, the eldest and a peace lover, assumed the throne. However, his mother, Nyamulanalwo, had a preference for her other son, Ramavhoya, and thus she encouraged him to plot against his brother. Ramavhoya rallied his supporters and marched to Tshilwavusiku, where the CBD of a town named after Makhado now stands. Rasithu fled the royal capital and initially settled at Mutolini, but fearing that Ramavhoya would attack him again, he moved to Rida in the Blueberg region and settled amongst the Tswana clan known as Bahanana. Ramavhoya established his rule as the king of Venda from his throne in Tshilwavusiku. However, Rasithu's eldest son, Dabana, remained determined to see his father regain the throne. Consequently, Dabana made numerous unsuccessful efforts to oust Ramavhoya from Tshilwavusiku. While these attempts didn't succeed, they did cause Ramavhoya to become uneasy and mistrustful, particularly towards a few Mahosi whom he suspected of remaining loyal to Rasithu during his exile. Ramavhoya, troubled by his circumstances, sought counsel from diviners and sorcerers. They advised him to find a physically strong and brave individual whose flesh and organs could be used to create pamba, a strong potion or charm for the upcoming planting season. This concoction would also be applied to fortify the warriors. A suitable opportunity arose when Kgoshi Mamokotopi, the Batlokwa ruler, and one of the chiefs who paid tribute to the Venda king, expressed interest in visiting the royal capital. Mamokotopi suggested that he and Ramavhoya embark on a hunting expedition into the jungles of Bukalanga, officially known as Zimbabwe. Ramavhoya, eagerly awaiting such an opportunity, agreed positively to Mamokotopi's proposal and arranged for their meeting at the confluence of the Gwibila and Lichobu rivers. Amidst the celebration marked by great joy and exuberance, with no signs of suspicion, one of Ramavhoya's associates unexpectedly attacked Mamokotopi, fatally stabbing him in the heart. Mamokotopi's followers hurriedly retreated to their homes, leaving their fallen leader vulnerable to Ramavhoya's men, who swiftly and meticulously extracted parts of his body for the preparation of pamba. In response to these actions by Ramavhoya, Mamokotopi's supporters decided to unite with Rasithu, who had come to be known among the Bahanana as Ramabulana, the Rainmaker. Through his actions, including dethroning his brother and orchestrating Mamokotopi's assassination, Ramavhoya had unintentionally brought the Batlokwa and Rasithu together as allies. Batlokwa offered military aid to Rasithu and his endeavor to remove Ramavhoya from Tshilwavusiku. During this period, the Boers, led by Louis-Trichardt, had established settlements within Venda, with their main camp located at Gogobole. These Boers, who had been promised land and elephant tusks in return for supporting Rasithu's quest to regain his throne, collaborated with Rasithu and the Batlokwa to oust Ramavhoya from power. Ramavhoya was enticed to Gogobole by the Boers, and it was there that he was assassinated by Rasithu, who had been concealed inside a Boer wagon. Following this event, when Rasithu assumed the throne of Venda, he adopted the name Ramabulana, which is a Venda version of Ramabulana. Mahosi, who had previously paid tribute to Ramavhoya, acknowledged Ramabulana as the legitimate king. Ramabulana's rule endured for an extended period, and it is believed he lived into his 90s. However, the Boers, his former allies in removing Ramavhoya, became a growing concern. They sought more land than originally agreed upon, and demanded VhaVenda men and women, including royal family members, to work for them without compensation. These demands sparked conflicts between VhaVenda and the Boers. In a notable incident, Dabana was arrested by the Boers, who were now stationed at Tibalalwe, present-day Shumansdal, on charges of allegedly stealing a white farmer's cow. Fortunately, Dabana managed to escape from captivity. Ramabulana, no longer trusting the Boers and fearing potential arrest by these land-hungry thugs, departed from Chirululuni. He relocated to one of his royal residences, Ngwekulu, for a period of 2 years before subsequently settling at Vuba, another of his royal estates. Vuba was relatively closer to Chirululuni than Ngwekulu. During this time, Ramabulana's younger brother, Madzhie, assumed responsibility for royal affairs at the Chirululuni royal estate. In his later years, Ramabulana received devoted care from Limani, who was Makhado's mother. Limani was the daughter of Madumba, a Mugwebo from Chidabadulu, and the younger brother of Kotsi Madidze, from the Mugwebo clan of Luonde. Limani's exceptional warmth and kindness towards Ramabulana during a time of great distress played a significant role in favoring her son Makhado's claim during disputes over the succession to Ramabulana's throne. In essence, Limani's actions paved the way for her son Makhado to ascend to the throne. Subsequently, Ramabulana instructed Makhado and Limani to return to Chirululuni, the royal capital, to be in closer proximity to the white settlers and serve as his eyes and ears. Recognizing the potential for a succession war among Ramabulana's sons after his passing, Makhado's maternal uncles, the Mugwebos, advised him to secretly undergo initiation at the Mula or Murundu institution in Hamashau. Makhado became the first Singo prince to undergo this rite. The purpose behind his maternal uncle's advice was to make him more acceptable to his fellow initiates, who would later form the core of his fighters in the succession war. Makhado embarked on this journey alongside his cousin Dwayamyomva Ravele. Notably, during the succession war, Ravele was dispatched by Makhado to Mauluma as the Khosi, tasked with defending against attacks by Dabana. The age group within which Makhado and Ravele underwent initiation was known as Madali. Some historians have claimed that Makhado was the first Muvenda to undergo initiation, but this assertion is incorrect. The Chibula and Mukwebo clans had already been attending these sacred traditional institutions long before Makhado's time. Makhado's maternal grandfather, Madumba, became the first Mukwebo to undergo initiation when he visited Mabambo, Hachibula. The Batwamamba and Bagwebo clans were among the early VhaVenda groups to initiate and perform circumcisions on their men. These two clans were, and still are, renowned as Bafumbisi, or circumcision surgeons. Therefore, while Makhado was indeed the first single prince to be initiated, he was not the first Venda to undergo this custom. Following his return from the initiation sanctum, Makhado faced rejection from his brothers due to his participation, leading him to withdraw and hide. It was during this time that Rasithu and Funyu approached him, inviting him to assist Boer hunters who were hunting elephants for ivory. Makhado accepted this offer and became part of the hunting parties, where he acquired skills in handling firearms. Along with other VhaVenda assistants, they secretly amassed a significant collection of firearms and ammunition during hunting expeditions in the summer, without Boer supervision. The Boers were hesitant to embark on summer hunting expeditions due to the challenging terrain, rainy season, tsetse flies, and malaria-bearing mosquitoes in the areas north of the Zoutpansberg mountain range. VhaVenda, who undertook independent hunting expeditions during the summer, would return with ivory but claimed to have lost some firearms and ammunition. However, Makhado was strategically preparing for a future conflict because he disapproved of the Boers' demands for labor and tribute from the king and Mahosi. While striving to strengthen his authority over a nation recovering from civil conflict and facing encroachments by the Boers, Ramabulana fell seriously ill. In the absence of any signs of improvement, Dabana secretly relocated his father from the royal estate and provided him with shelter in a modest residence outside the royal headquarters. Dabana had issued instructions for the construction of this dwelling to facilitate Ramabulana's isolated treatment. During Ramabulana's seclusion, Dabana assumed control of royal matters, effectively becoming the de facto king due to his father's incapacitation. Ultimately, Ramabulana passed away in 1864. Respected Venda historian Professor Mphaya Nemudzivhadi asserts that Ramabulana's death, much like that of any Venda monarch, created a void, the filling of which ignited political turmoil and upheaval that swept across the entire nation. The reasons for this turmoil can be summarized in three ways. Firstly, VhaVenda kings did not designate their successors, requiring princes and their supporters to await an announcement from the royal council led by Makhadzi, the paternal aunt, and Kodzimunene, the paternal uncle, regarding who would succeed the departed king. Typically, this announcement occurred 12 months after the previous king's passing. Secondly, the Ramabulana lineage held the belief that Aboneu Bugoma Ramabulana Asibuswa, which meant that a Ramabulana prince had to fight for kingship, as it was not handed out like a readily available meal. Thirdly, and of paramount importance, in accordance with Tshivenda customs and traditions, kingship was not the personal possession of the king, but it belonged to the royal house. It was also an institution of Trinity. Upon the king's installation, two additional individuals were installed alongside him, the Kadzi and the Ndumi, who were the king's sister and brother, respectively. These two, together with the previous king's Kadzi and Ndumi, became the primary advisors to the new king. After the new king's installation, the previous king's Kadzi and Ndumi assumed the roles of Makhadzi and Kodzimunene, respectively. Decisions made by the king were done in consultations with the Kadzi, Ndumi, Makhadzi, and Kodzimunene. Makhadzi and Kodzimunene bear the responsibility of identifying and installing the new king through a process known as Ubumba Bugoma, which signifies the molding and formation of kingship. Without their blessing, no kingship can be deemed valid. Ramabulana had several sons, including Dabana, Rasithu, Ntabalala, Kangale, Ramalamula, Liswoga, Matamela, Ramaru, Ramanala, Ralipaswa, and Makhado. Even though Ramabulana lived to an old age, the people sought to find the cause of his death as per Venda custom, which required an explanation for every death. They consulted diviners to uncover the truth. And in Ramabulana's case, suspicion fell upon Dabana as the one responsible for his father's demise, with some compelling reasons. At the time of Ramabulana's death, he was under Dabana's care in a dwelling outside the royal family estate. This perception among the VhaVenda people influenced Dabana's eventual ascent to the throne. After Ramabulana's passing, some of Dabana's younger brothers approached Makazi Nyakuhu, Ramabulana's sister and Kazi, to support Dabana's installation as king, although this deviated from tradition. Makazi Nyakuhu directed them to convene all the sons except Makhado, who was excluded because he had been circumcised and was deemed no longer eligible. Ramabulana's sons favored Dabana for the throne, but Makazi Nyakuhu, initially against this, yielded to pressure and allowed them to proceed. Dabana assumed the role of Thobele, or king, but this move lacked the support of Makazi Nyakuhu and Madzhie, rendering his ascension void. Dabana's reign was marred by widespread disapproval, with many VhaVenda viewing him as a harsh and tyrannical ruler. His cruelty, including allegations of murdering innocent people and hiding their bodies in maize storage pits, contributed to this perception. Even his father, Ramabulana, had expressed concerns about Dabana's cruelty, saying he would not succeed him as king. The majority of people favored Makhado, whose mother, Limani, was well loved for her kindness, generosity, and hospitable nature. In contrast, Dabana's mother was suspected of practicing witchcraft, further fueling negative sentiments toward him. Makazi Nyakuhu and Madzhie decided to install Makhado as the new king. Makhado's supporters included Funyu, Rasibechele, Ndwayamyomva, his maternal uncles, cousins from various places, and his age group, Madali. They rallied behind him. Meanwhile, Dabana, aware of his lack of favor with Makazi Nyakuhu and Madzhie, sought to locate and eliminate Makhado. His actions only alienated his remaining supporters, and he clashed with his cousin, Mapaha of Pau, who was Makazi Nyakuhu's son. Once the preparation for Makhado's installation were finalized, his advisors recommended that he undergo ritual preparations, overseen by a diviner known as Maine. This ceremonial process, referred to as Chiroba, was believed to invoke heavy rains or mist, providing a shroud of concealment for his army, allowing them to advance without detection by the enemy. These medicinal preparations aimed to bolster and fortify the army while bewildering the adversaries. Upon completing all the ritual preparations, Makhado received the miner's directive to launch an attack on Dabana. As anticipated, heavy rains descended upon the land. Under the cover of this deluge, Makhado's forces moved to expel Dabana from Buba. Overwhelmed, Dabana and his supporters hastily retreated, abandoning vital religious instruments known as zwitungulo. Makhado claimed these artifacts and entrusted them to Makazi Nyakuo at Chirululuni. Following Dabana's defeat, a significant gathering was convened by Kodzimunene Madzhie at Chirululuni to discuss the zwitungulo and preparations for Makhado's coronation. Makazi Nyakuo, who couldn't have received a more meaningful gift than her ancestors' zwitungulo. Overwhelmed with joy, she leaped up and performed a ritual dance. Subsequently, she placed the zwitungulo before Makhado and declared him king of Venda. However, her brother, Kodzimunene Madzhie, didn't share her joy and believed he should have been the one to proclaim Makhado as king. In a lavish ceremony attended by both common citizens and dignitaries, Makhado was crowned king. Kodzimunene Madzhie, still resentful of Makazi Nyakuo's role, boycotted the official crowning ceremony, joined by his supporter Funyu. Makhado responded by sending an army to discipline them. Eventually, Madzhie and Funyu humbled themselves and displayed their loyalty at the main Musanda, royal residence of Chirululuni. Makhado's rise to kingship was widely celebrated. Even the Boers at Tibalalwe, Schumannsdal, led by Stephanus Schumann, were content with him and acknowledged him as Thobele of Venda. They assumed he would be their ally due to his upbringing, working on their farms and assisting hunting expeditions. However, their assumption proved to be incorrect. Among ordinary people, Makhado's ascension was met with enthusiasm. In addition to his kingly qualities, he was perceived as a brave leader. They saw in him the potential to revive the united Venda kingdom to its former glory, reminiscent of the reigns of Dimbanyiga, Velelambeu, and Thohoyandou. After becoming king, Makhado moved the main Musanda from Chirululuni to Lwadame on Mount Songozi. Chirululuni became the cattle post. The relocation of the main royal residence from Chirululuni to Lwadame was done after the family Maine Lishiba had already surveyed the area, fortified it with medicines and charms, and laid out the foundations for the new royal headquarters. Lwadame was a perfect residence fit for a king. Sheer cliffs fortified the palace of one of the African liberation struggle heroes. Lwadame offered King Makhado the full view of all those approaching, including enemies. Lwadame and Chirululuni also provided the Venda capital with a home rich with wild fruits, good pasture for their many cattle, large tracts of land for plowing, and a place free of mosquitoes that plagued many Venda areas in the summer. Realizing that Albasini was supporting and giving Dabana sanctuary, and that the Boers at Tibalalwe were becoming an inconvenience, Makhado decided to reorganize the Venda army by establishing battalions in different regions. King Makhado's army commander, Funyu, visited his brother who was working for the Boers in Schumannsdal. Funyu witnessed how the Boers were ill-treating VhaVenda at Schumannsdal. The following day, 13 July 1867, the drum was beaten and Venda soldiers assembled for the attack. They went down and killed everybody who was there. The only survivors were 2 hunters who had gone out. They raced away towards the south, where they got help to go back and claim their dead. The bodies were taken to Soekmekar, and many went there to look for their relatives. And the name Soekmekar, looking for one another, came from that. The destruction of Schumannsdal meant that the regime in Pretoria had lost its hold on Venda. The whites settled in Marabastad outside Polokwane and later settled in Polokwane. The settlers then tried many tricks to get King Makhado on their side. On 20th November 1869, Kruger, R.A. van Nispen, and Commandant D.B. Snyman assembled more than 80 Ramabulana Mahosi to pledge their loyalty to the white regime. King Makhado boycotted the meeting and refused to abide by its decree. In 1887, Bijubed was sent to try and convince Makhado that his land was too big for the number of people he ruled. King Makhado rejected this. He said his people would not be counted for a census, and that his land did not need to be measured, as he knew where it started and where it ended. The settlers, together with Shangani, or Tsonga-speaking men aligned to a Portuguese man called João Albacini, once more tried to fight King Makhado, but they could not dislodge him after several fights. This earned King Makhado the nickname Bull of the North and the praise name Tshilwavusiku cha Ramabulana, the night fighter of Ramabulana, because he attacked at night with men who knew the area intimately. When Makhado ascended the throne at the beginning of 1864, the Boers had already firmly established themselves in his territory at Tshibalalo, Luonde, and other areas where they started conducting farming operations. The Boers began to flex their muscle in an effort to exercise control over everything they found, including the indigenous inhabitants. This control was exercised through unilateral land demarcations, forced taxation, and compulsory labor. These activities gave offense to the Venda nation. Tabana's stay at Luonde under the protection of Albacini and the activities of the land-hungry and land-grabbing Boers at Tshibalalo angered Makhado. He decided that whites staying at Luonde and Tshibalalo had to be driven out of Venda. Furthermore, the Boers at Tshibalalo had decided on 27 February 1855 that money had to be raised from VhaVenda for the improvement of the Boer settlement at Tshibalalo. To make it easier to collect this money, the Boers decided that Mahosi should collect tributes from their subjects and hand the tributes over to the Boer representatives. Schumann appointed Albacini as a tribute collector. Albacini in turn appointed some of his Tsonga followers as tribute collectors. But Makhado vehemently resisted any attempts to subjugate VhaVenda to the laws of the Boers. To him, the payment of taxes to Albacini would signal an acceptance of not only subjugation to the Boers, but also to the foreigners who had illegally established themselves at Luonde. Realizing that VhaVenda were resisting paying tribute to the Boers, Albacini and his followers went on expeditions to collect tribute by force. But they did not only collect tribute from VhaVenda, they also stole and seized people's cattle, goats, sheep, ivory, and hoes. The tribute and the seizing of people's livestock led to animosity between VhaVenda and the whites. It has already been mentioned that during the rainy season, the Boers used to give VhaVenda arms and ammunition to go on an elephant hunting expedition. Albacini's behavior and the attempts by the Boers to exert their authority over VhaVenda led to the latter acquiring guns by either claiming to have lost them in the hunting expeditions or simply refusing to hand them back. VhaVenda also told the Boers that they had worked for a long time without any remuneration, and that the guns could be considered payment for their labors and forced taxation. VhaVenda also decided to trade directly with the Portuguese in Mozambique by exchanging ivory for artillery. What triggered the war between VhaVenda and the whites was the fallout between Albacini and his Tsonga Induna, Munene. The king of the Gasa kingdom, a Shangani kingdom in Mozambique, Manukosi, passed away in 1859. His two sons, Mzila and Mawewe, fought for the throne. Mzila was driven into Venda and settled at Chitabadulu, Chakuma. His settlement at Chitabadulu was sanctioned by Khosi Ralutaga Madzivandila of Chakuma. Mzila's stay in Venda was, however, short-lived. He returned to Mozambique, whereupon he defeated Mawewe and became the king of the Gaza Kingdom in 1861. After gaining complete control of the Gaza Kingdom, Mzila lodged a complaint with Albasini, requesting him to extradite Munene with his wives and children to Mozambique, or to put them to death for the offenses Munene was alleged to have committed during the reign of Manukosi. Mzila further warned that should his request be denied, he would close the hunting grounds in his country to further trade, thus denying hunters and traders access to their chief source of income, ivory. Faced with this dilemma, Albasini felt he had no choice but to succumb to the ultimatum. But while still contemplating his course of action, Munene became aware of Albasini's treachery and fled to the protection of Commandant F.H. Giza at Tibalalwe. Munene was arrested by the Boers at Tibalalwe after Albasini had lodged a complaint against him. Munene, however, escaped from custody on 28 March 1865. He sought refuge at Luatame, Songozi, then Pawe, and ultimately at Mukumbani. When news of Munene's escape from detention reached Albasini, he became furious and immediately dispatched his subjects, ordering them to search for Munene. Albasini's marauders ill-treated innocent villagers and pillaged their homes. They also committed criminal acts against Kosi Magoro and other Mahosi. On 7 April 1865, the Boer commando under Venda in Albasini, and which included Dabana and Tsonga warriors, left Luonde and traveled over the mountains as far as Pawe. Horrifying atrocities were committed under the pretext of looking for Munene. In the course of this invasion, several subjects of Kosi Chikumbu Mapaha, including his mother, the famous Makazi Nyakoho, were killed. A number of cattle, sheep, and goats were also taken. In addition, several defenseless women and children were taken prisoner. Dabana was accused of having killed Makazi Nyakoho, skinning her, and wearing her skin as a mask to look like her. This, it was alleged, was a desperate attempt by Dabana to go to Makhado, looking like Makazi Nyakoho with the aim of assassinating Makhado. On 8 May 1865, these combined forces then traveled to the next target, Chakuma. These attacks on Pawe and Chakuma signaled the commencement of the conflict in earnest, as VhaVenda started preparing themselves for war. As the situation deteriorated, the tribute collectors realized that VhaVenda were armed with guns obtained from hunters and traders. They demanded from Madzhie that the firearms be returned to the Boers. Madzhie's reply was clear. As long as the Boers had not yet complied with the request that Dabana be handed over to Makhado, no firearms would be returned. This reply further aggravated the already tense situation. The Boers were so angry that they launched an attack on Madzhie on 1 September 1865. Their attack was, however, repelled by VhaVenda. The Boers retreated with their tails between their legs. The Boers ill-treated VhaVenda employed on their farms and domestic workers in Tibalalwe. Although the working conditions on the farms and in the households are unrecorded, there is one occurrence which remains in the memory of VhaVenda, and which, according to them, led to VhaVenda attacking and driving the Boers out of Venda. One of the young VhaVenda employed on a farm was Mboyi, a younger brother of Funyufunyu, the Kosi of Bulora and the commander of Baingamela Battalion. Both Funyufunyu and Mboyi were sons of Chinetise Matinyatsiulu of Bulora. Mboyi was employed primarily to look after the cattle. One day, Mboyi's elder brother, Funyufunyu, visited him during the morning milking session. Funyu was waiting for him outside the kraal. However, there were also 3 Boers inside the kraal. Mboy was in the process of milking, and the container was almost full when a calf came running in and pushed the milk container with its head, resulting in the spilling of all the milk. When the 3 Boers saw the milk flowing away, they became furious, berating him for the loss of all the milk, and thrashed Mamboy to such an extent that they left him unconscious. Funyu witnessed the entire episode, and sympathizing with the unjustifiable punishment of his younger brother, rushed to Lwadame to inform Makhado of the beating. King Makhado took up the matter and referred it to his uncle, Madzhie, for further advice. Makhado was worried by the attitude of the 3 Boers and concluded that the whole white community was arrogant and that it looked down upon his people. Madzhie's response was that the time to launch an attack on the whites had come. Makhado, however, was cautious as he doubted the VhaVenda's ability to face the whites in an all-out war. But Madzhie was persistent in his demands that war should be declared. Mahosi also agreed with Madzhie that the Boers needed to be driven out of Venda. After their defeat at Hamadzhie, the Boers requested reinforcements from Pretoria. In May 1867, 500 Boer fighters arrived from Pretoria and stationed themselves on the western side of Tshibalala. Their arrival, which brought relief to the Boers, signaled a warning to Makhado that should he not comply with the demands the Boers imposed on him, the outbreak of full-scale war between the 2 groups was inevitable. Before any military action was undertaken by the Boers, Paul Kruger sent a deputation to one of Makhado's royal residences, Magwatambane. The deputation requested that Makhado should come down to Tshibalala and enter into negotiations aimed at averting war. Makhado felt insulted that the leader of the Boers was summoning him in his own land instead of the Boers visiting him. He therefore responded negatively to the request. To further complicate matters, he sent a group of young boys to meet the Boer delegation, a tactic which the Boers regarded as a sign of his contempt for them and their peace offerings. When the Boer demands were refused, forces led by one of the commandants, Frikkie van Dyk, attempted to storm Makhado's royal residence at Lwadame. The topography of the place, with its heavy boulders and ravines, presented an insurmountable difficulty to the attackers. The Boers suffered heavy losses. They diverted their attack to Bulora, north of Schumansdal. When the Boer commando approached Bulora, 3 prominent diviners, Lidzwavo, Bereda, and Mukoba, had, through their Tangu bones, discovered that the Boers were coming. Subsequently, the VhaVenda army prepared themselves under the command of Funyu. The Boers were sent packing, and a lot of them were killed. On their way back, the surviving Boers disturbed beehives on the Mount Burengwe. The bees came out in huge swarms and attacked the Boers. This led to even more Boers dying. The surviving ones scattered in all directions, fleeing to Tshibalala after having failed to storm both Lwadame and Bulora. The next target of attack was, for the second time, Hamadzhie. The Boers were joined by Dabana, who joined the battle for his personal benefit as well as payment for Albasini's protection. Apart from Dabana's followers, Albasini, who was waiting for such an opportunity, assisted the Boers by providing them with his Tsonga warriors, armed with assegais and spears. When the attackers arrived at Hamadzhie, 400 troops climbed the high mountain, occupying strategic positions directly behind boulders. The the intent being to forestall the arrival of any reinforcement from Venda's other battalions, thus isolating and containing Madzhie's large army within the confines of his mountain stronghold. The Commandant General himself, together with some of his men, remained on the slopes of the mountain with a cannon in place. The Boers, under command of David Herbst, proceeded to the nearer boulder, while Albasini's Tsonga warriors approached from the east. Madzhie's fighters unleashed a hail of bullets from their elephant guns. The situation was such that the Boers and their allies were unable to penetrate the strategic points. Under these difficult conditions, with a lot of Boers and Tsonga fighters dead, the Boers immediately realized that continuing the fighting would be dangerous. It was not possible to launch a full-scale attack on the fortified mountainous stronghold. They retreated from an offensive to a defensive position. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the Commandant General ordered the commando to retreat from the slopes to join those stationed at the foot of the mountain. Eventually, the Boers retreated to Thibalalwe, leaving Madzhie's army and the man believed to be the brains behind the outbreak of hostilities, Madzhie himself, undefeated. After the 3 major confrontations with the Boers and the heavy defeats inflicted on the Boers, Makhado's armies were still intact. His fighting strength remained unabated. The heavy losses suffered at Luatame, Bulora, and Hamadzhie were hailed by VhaVenda as military successes. To the Boers, these defeats were catastrophic. On their return to Thibalalwe, a meeting was convened to discuss the future of the settlement. The Boers, realizing that they had no chance of defeating VhaVenda, decided to leave Venda. Remaining there was no longer advisable, as they heard the whole night the sound of VhaVenda's war drum, Mutulogole, signaling VhaVenda's intended attack on the town. Following these discussions, the inhabitants became convinced that they had no alternative but to commence packing their wagons in preparation for departure. Doors, windows, and poles were all packed to use for rebuilding in a new settlement. It was a pitiable moment when tears rolled down cheeks as women and children wept at the thought of leaving the town which had been their home for almost 19 years. On July 15th, 1867, when all preparations were in place, the Boers departed from Schoemansdal, taking the route through Blueberg. VhaVenda observed from mountain vantage points as the dust rose near Hamachama, indicating the mass exodus of the Boers returning southward to their place of origin. As soon as the Boer inhabitants were entirely gone, the VhaVenda swiftly rushed to the abandoned town with the intent of utterly destroying it. As the Boers continued their journey, they witnessed the once thriving settlement of Schoemansdal, now engulfed in flames and dark smoke. It was a poignant sight for them, especially when they considered the deserted graves, orchards, gardens, houses, furniture, livestock, and all other possessions too cumbersome to carry along. King Makhado had effectively achieved the expulsion of the Boers from Venda and reduced Schoemansdal to ruins. This marked the conclusion of the era of white residence in the northernmost part of South Africa. Failing to subjugate VhaVenda, the Boers were unable to extend their authority over the Venda kingdom. VhaVenda remained undefeated and free from Boer domination. This conflict was not a rebellion where the conquered rose against their conquerors. It was a war resulting in the preservation of VhaVenda freedom from Boer subjugation. Following this significant victory, Makhado earned the moniker Tshilwavusiku Ramabulana, meaning the night fighter of Ramabulana, among the legendary titles cherished by the Venda. This name was bestowed upon him because some of Makhado's strategies included nighttime attacks on the Boers. The expulsion of the Boers from Venda symbolized Makhado's triumph through his valor as a warrior and his leadership among his people. The Boers referred to him as the Lion of the North, and praises and songs celebrated him as a diplomat, statesman, and fearless champion who defended his people and preserved their kingdom.